I'm in my grandson's bedroom. Charlie and Wally are both at school, so it's a good time for me to hang out here and, you know, talk with you about the book of Matthew. We're in chapter 26, and I started into what I think is a part of Matthew's account that needs a lot more time than I could have given it last time. We're just, earlier in this chapter, Judas had gone to the Jewish leaders and had arranged with them that he would deliver Jesus to them and they would pay him 30 pieces of silver, the common price for a common slave. At the Last Supper, the meal in the upper room where Jesus reclined with his disciples, he said, "One of you will betray me." And of course, all the disciples were, you can't mean me. I wouldn't be me, would it? Well, even Judas said that. And in verse 28, Jesus answered him, "You have said so." Meaning, yeah, you know that. Then verse 26, while they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." This was a part of the Passover Seder, the idea of breaking the bread and each one eating from that broken bread. But Jesus gave it a new meaning. This is not just the unleavened bread that had not been leavened because Israel was leaving Egypt in such a hurry, there wasn't time to leaven the bread. This broken bread, and you can get it at your grocery store. It's matzah bread, and it's just what we Gentiles call cracker, although it doesn't have the salt on top that most of the saltine crackers that we have. But anyway, he broke the bread and said, "Take and eat. This is my body." Well, obviously, this is metaphorical talk. This, I think it's safe to say, Jesus meant, this symbolizes my body. For you, this is my body. I'm totally sure that the disciples didn't really get it. I'm not sure. Okay, whatever. And they took the bread and they all ate it. And what most of us Gentiles miss is that these disciples, these apostles, had been coming to the Passover meal table every year of their life. And they, although they may have not had it memorized, they were really clear on what was the process. And this was a part of the process. But Jesus throws this twist in. I don't think they knew what he was talking about. How could they? His sacrifice, the sacrifice of his life, had not yet happened. Okay. Verse 27, then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them. Now, this giving thanks idea, there was a standard prayer for Thanksgiving, but basically said, "Blessed are you, O Lord our God, the maker of heaven and earth, the giver of grain for the bread." And then when he gave thanks for the cup, the giver of the fruit of the vine. I mean, again, the disciples would have heard this every year of their life, and this is not the only time that prayer would have been used. Often they heard it. It's kind of like, not quite, for them, it wouldn't quite have been rub it up, dub, thank you for the grub, but it would have been, the more standardized prayers that we grew up with. Okay. He gave the cup to them, and it was a common cup. Each disciple did not have their own. Well, they may have had a cup, but this was a singular cup. Jesus gave it to them, and this is what he said: "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." How, the disciples they didn't know what that was about. They couldn't have. Now, Jesus had been telling them for quite a while now that he was going to Jerusalem and that he would be arrested, he would be mocked, he would die on the cross at the hands of evil men. And they had heard this. It's my belief that I won't say that God hid it from them, but they didn't have anything to connect that with in their experience. Now he says this, and it would have been wine. I grew up in a church tradition that was a teetotal tradition, and the idea of communion being part of it being wine, that would never fly. And I also have heard from a lot of people within that church tradition that this couldn't have been wine. Jesus drank grape juice, the fruit of the vine, the juice, and yet that can't be supported by history and Jewish tradition, for whatever that matters. What it doesn't say is, here, go ahead and drink all you want, anytime you want, of anything you want. That's not what I'm saying. But they had no way of, it's just my sense, if I put myself in their sandals, I wouldn't have known what this is about. I didn't have anything in my experience to connect that with. It was kind of whatever. And then in verse 29, he said, "I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." Is that just any wine? I think so. But I think he was specifically saying to them, I won't do this again until I do it with you in my Father's kingdom. Okay. And I'm not sure that I can explain that well, although I will say, when Jesus rose from the dead, the kingdom was here, and it became available to every person. So I'm pretty good with the idea that when he showed up, surprised the disciples, and he ate with them, I think he may have enjoyed a little wine with his dinner. That's just me. You don't have to believe that. And if it's a problem for you, don't mess with it. Just move on. I grew up in a church tradition that we interpreted this as the model. And in the book of Acts, chapter 2, in verse 42, the Luke, the author of the book of Acts, I guess God is the author. Luke was the secretary of the history of the beginning of the church. He talks about that the church met from house to house, and they studied the apostles' doctrine, they prayed, they broke bread. I think most Bible scholars that I've studied, they tie that back here to this Passover meal, this part of the Passover meal in the story of Jesus' life in the Gospels. For my upbringing, we had communion every Sunday. And while I love that, I'm not sure having communion every Sunday gets you into heaven, or not having it every Sunday keeps you out. I'm pretty sure that's not the case. I do know Paul wrote about extensively the value of sharing the bread and the wine together as often as we do it. Jesus in one of the other Gospels writes, as often as you do this, remember me. That's the point of it. I still prefer sharing communion weekly. The Catholics generally believe in a doctrine called transubstantiation, so that when the priest blesses the wafer and the cup, this literally becomes the body and the blood of Jesus that we ingest. I'm not even sure believing or not believing that has anything to do with going to heaven or not. I'm thinking pretty sure not. When I was a kid, little kid, I saw the tiny little piece of cracker in that plate that passed, and a little bitty cup of juice. Like, well, that's not much of a snack. And then as I grew older, I began to understand a little bit about the meaning of that little bitty piece of cracker and that tiny little cup of juice. For me, it reminds me in an intentional way of the cost of my freedom. It reminds me, when I think of the body and the blood of Christ, how can you not connect that with the sacrifice of his life? Because that's exactly what Jesus meant. So I don't want to be on a high horse about it, but I do want to say, don't misunderstand or take for granted the incredible value of what most churches call the Lord's Supper. High church calls it Eucharist. I've never been a high church guy, although I did go to a high church service in Westminster Abbey in London with my wife, and I realized that their entire service, it was a train, and the destination was the Eucharist. The sermon was actually quite superfluous, and it was pretty much, that was the deal. I grew up church where the sermon was the deal, right? Not at Westminster Abbey this Sunday we were there. And that standing in line to take the wafer and sip from a common cup was one of the most profound communion experiences I've ever had. However you do it, little cups, big cup, the point is, do it and remember him. Okay, that's enough for today. I'll see you next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.